Today I wanted to talk about why I chose psychology and why it took me so long to go back to school to study psychology. I've always been interested in human behavior since I was a child. I think that stems from trying to understand my mom and the way that she parented me. I never really felt loved or um, basically loved by her. So I think I was just trying to understand why maybe I wasn't lovable, or was it something about my mom? And as I got older and I had friends and would spend time with my friends at their homes and notice how their moms treated them, I realized that my mom didn't mother in a normal fashion. And so then I began to observe behavior to learn how I wanted to mother, because the example I had was not what I wanted to follow. So I had to kind of fill in the gaps. So really, I used my mom as a model of how not to be a parent, and then I had to find how to be a parent. And so I observed other women and how they treated people and how they took care of their children to learn what it meant to be a mom and how that would inform the way I parented my kids. So from the earliest age, I can remember observing my mom and what she did and just wondering why and what it meant. And then as I grew older, I continued to be interested in why people did what they did, how people behaved around friends, family, and just, different, just human behavior in general fascinated me. And then I was married at a very young age. I was 18 when I had my first child. And so I had to learn a lot on the fly about being a mom, being a wife, what all of those things meant. And then at some point later in life, I read a lot of self-help books because I thought that any problems in my relationships or in my life were because of some failing in either my personality, morality, or behavior. So, like I said, I didn't have a strong model of being a woman or a mother from my mom. So I turned to reading a lot of books on relationships, Christianity, all of the different things to learn how I should show up in the world and to try to show up as a better mom, partner, person, to see if that would change my life. So I took a lot of ownership for anything that was wrong in my life on myself and tried to correct it through what I felt I could control, which was how I behaved, how I lived my life. And then once I was divorced, or during the divorce process, I knew I was going to have to go from a stay-at-home homeschooling mom to a single mom who worked to provide for myself and my children. So I began to look for what I wanted to do. I've always been interested in writing. I love to write. Since I was very young, I would write poetry and stories, and I like to make up stories to tell to my younger siblings, like bedtime stories and things like that. So during the divorce, I thought I would try to do something, try to write as a way to earn money. And I realized that could be a long, complicated journey and wouldn't necessarily lead to a paycheck immediately. So I went into dental assisting, knowing that that wasn't really in alignment with my life choices, but it was something I felt I could do well, and it would pay enough. So that's what I did. And then always throughout my life, I've always felt like there was something I was reaching for that I couldn't quite get. And for a long time, I thought it was just that I needed to write a book. And that's the thing that I wasn't doing that I was supposed to do. And then, as I got further along, past the divorce, I continued to kind of reach for what was the thing that would give me meaning in life. What did I want to do? And I was still interested in human behavior because I was watching now as a parent my children go through the effects of divorce and learning how I could better support them throughout that time frame, and also working on my own mental health and recovery from my past trauma in my marriage. So I became interested in psychology for a different reason. At that point, it was more to understand what I had gone through and what it would take to heal from it, what was possible in healing from it, and how to set a better example of leadership and healthy parenting for my children and to support them. So that's how my focus of psychology changed at that point. And then when I got further along and felt more stable, I turned to, I always knew throughout the divorce that I wanted to help other women like me. So I was always looking for what that would look like in my life. And then after getting to a more stable parenting, single parenting, working mom situation, I began to look more into that again. And at first I wrote about my experience and shared what I thought would help other moms going through what I had gone through. And then I had a podcast for a while, and then it turned into, well, maybe I can coach other people. So I went through a coaching program, and I'm a trauma recovery coach. And I've never really started my practice. I'm currently in a program to get more coaching hours under my belt because I think it is a valid form of working with others. And I do want to continue to build my skills in that capacity as a coach. So I'm doing that now. But then at one point, I thought again about going back to school. I had always wanted to go to college, but I got married, before I even graduated high school. And then I always had a small child to care for. So it wasn't really practical. And I didn't see it as a possibility in my life until a few years ago when I realized I could go primarily online and go to school around my full-time job. So that's what I began doing. And I chose psychology after a few months of, I've taken assessment tests and those employment tests that you take that show you what your aptitude is. And it's always, my aptitude always comes up in like a helping field, and that would be like nursing, dental assisting, and then also like a therapist or a writer. So when I decided to go back to school, I kind of knew I wanted to study psychology, but I wasn't 100% sure. So part of my decision-making process was to look through the different degrees available and the career trajectory for each of those degrees. And really the one that aligned the most with me was psychology. I did also look at maybe a degree in some kind of writing, but again, the need to have a viable money-making career that I can rely on was a higher goal than being a writer. I am going to minor in writing because I do really feel like, for me, writing and psychology align very well, and I want to continue to learn about the mind and human behavior, not only to equip myself to better parent my children, because that's always my ultimate goal, to do what I can to support them, to understand them, especially because of some of the things that they've gone through and some of the relationship aspects, dynamics that I am dealing with as a mom of adults and also minor children. So that's been important to me. And I think that there's so much potential for healing and growth and change in the human mind that I want to continue to learn about it and see if, being a therapist, that's the next step in my mind, beyond coaching, how I can help people in that way. And, that would mean one-on-one coaching or therapy, counseling people, as well as writing and speaking about what I learn, especially as a survivor of certain kinds of trauma. I feel like that lived experience, being able to communicate it and share it with others, is very important for myself, for my own meaning and passion. I'm passionate about that. And also, I really want to understand what helps survivors, especially domestic violence and narcissistic abuse survivors. What is it that is the turning point for them to get out and stay out and then begin to heal? And I've been interested in that for a while. Like, I've talked to a lot of survivors, and I'm always interested in trying to find the one piece, the one element that they all share in their stories of survival. Like, like I said, what is that switch that does it for them, that turns them from a victim to a survivor, that thing that pushes them past being stuck or maybe going back, and that gives them that moment of strength where they really dig down deep and realize that they can do it, and then they do it and get out and make their lives over, become a completely different person. So that's fascinating to me. And I think not only because I've spoken with a lot of survivors, I would like to work with survivors to further understand that, and if I can, help to communicate that to maybe people who aren't able to go to therapy or coaching. I want to bring that element of survival, that element of overcoming, to everyone, if that means through like videos of talking about it, through a book, whatever it is. That's one of my main goals, and has been for the last 7 years, is like, what is the roadmap? What is the commonality that survivors share? And that those who are maybe curious about the situation they're in and what it looks like if they leave, that they can learn from and maybe get a better idea. Because when you're stuck in a situation and you don't know what it looks like on the other side, that can keep you there. But if you have an idea of what freedom looks like and what the path to freedom is, and the things you may have to go through, but how you can be supported, the strength that you'll find, and like what it is that gets you to the other side. I think removing that fear, uncovering that road, really helps people to see that it's possible for them. And that's one of the things I wanted to do with my podcast that I never did, and maybe I will be able to do this now, was to really share the stories of other survivors. And not me telling their story, but for them to tell their story in their own voice. I think it's very powerful. I know for me, hearing other women's stories of why they left and how, and some of the reasons or realizations they had to come out of denial and to realize what their situation was, those were all very important to me to understand my situation. I think sometimes we can't look at ourselves objectively or from far enough away to see what we're in. But when we hear someone else's story and it's maybe similar to ours, we can say to that person we're listening to, that's not right. I'm sorry you're going through that. I'm sorry you went through that. And that's not okay. Then when we're able to say that for someone else, we're able to say it for ourselves. And that is a really strong element in us being able to change as well. So that's the long story of why I am so interested in psychology, and why I want to study it. It's that fascination of why people do what they do, how you can change your life, how hard it is, but also how rewarding and meaningful it can be to like understand those patterns of behavior, which can kind of set you free from being almost a robot to your behaviors, and then instead to choosing a different way. So, like setting you free to make a choice instead of continuing the same thing, to make a choice so that you can begin to change your life. And that's why psychology fascinates me, and really what I want to learn and communicate to others. Like the possibility that understanding human behavior brings to our lives, the possibility to change, to grow, and that as long as you're alive, you have that potential to live your life differently. And I think it's exciting and interesting, and I really want to open that door for more people. So there we go. All right, thank you for listening, and feel free to like, subscribe, leave comments. I would love to hear more about your story if you want to share. And I appreciate you, and I hope you have a wonderful week full of freedom, love, and peace. Bye.